All right. Topic of the day that we're going to be talking about on this week's episode of Jordan and Matthew Regine Q&A on the reg, traveling on the reg, however you want to pronounce our last name, it doesn't matter. We're just here for you folks, okay? So, what we're going to be talking about is we're going to be talking about low-hanging fruit in all of the contexts of low-hanging fruit. Um,
Like Fruit of the Loom?
that's not quite a context that makes a lot of sense for our listeners that are, our thousands of subscribers, active listeners that
I think people appreciate lighthearted banter that's funny and witty puns.
perhaps, yeah. I don't usually let it come out in a business context for whatever reason. I think it's just PTSD. I just was told one day, like, be professional, and then I just really took it to heart, and that's all I've been. It's like Ricky Bobby, if you ain't first,
Like those
last.
hands?
Um,
I
but
think
yeah,
being
so
professional is I don't know, being professional is so interesting. I want to get onto your topic, but I think this is a really interesting one too. Like being professional, there's definitely an air of like professionalism in certain contexts that I think is certainly important. It shows that you can compose yourself, that you carry yourself a certain way, you have, that energy and you can bring things to a close. But at the same time, I don't know, it feels so stuffy and old and pretentious, and it's like, I want to do business with real people who are their authentic selves that I can relate with, and that stuffy East Coast, like I'm gonna wear a tie and be professional every day so that you know how serious I am. I don't know, man. I don't think that's how I
I think
want.
there's value to taking what you're doing seriously. I think the persona of professionalism often is feigning competence. Um, but what I will say is there are some key things that I think professionalism does do right that when people stop being professional, it really pisses me off. And
Hmm.
the biggest one is not proofing their work. No, not quality controlling the work. And by work I mean simple communication, right? If you're texting someone, if you're emailing someone on a professional setting and you have typos galore, you don't have grammar and punctuation, you don't include links, you don't check that you're not asking the same question they already answered. That's the type of stuff that it just absolutely floors me because that's the absolute basics of good account management and good customer service.
I think that's super fair. I also think that's context specific though. Like for instance, if you're working with someone who's in the service industry, or a contractor service industry, like a plumber or roofer or someone who's out in the field, and they're talking to Siri or they're working with gloves or they're out doing something physical, and it's important for them to maintain focus and awareness on the job, but they also need to get that communication out. I'm going to give them a little bit more grace than someone whose job it is to sit behind a computer.
If if they're your client, of course you give them grace. Like
Yeah.
that's the whole point of the client account manager relationship. And like my clients, if they prefer texting and they text me, obviously I'm not going to like criticize or critique their how they're texting me. I'm talking about less of a client account manager relationship and more of like a peer-to-peer relationship or a sales to prospect relationship. Um, and honestly, just anything that's more traditional in front of your computer desk job
Yeah.
deal. Like if you're in the field and your main competence isn't technology, which that's not a knock by any means. It happens to plenty of people that are very successful and do an amazing job and are very intelligent. But if your main competence isn't technology, I'm not going to hold you to like having a very well crafted email subject line. I mean, I still receive emails to this day where the email is the subject line. Like the content of the email is the subject line, and they don't actually put any content. So like that, like I'm not going to judge that if it's a client, but if it's a peer or a colleague or another professional, especially if it's like, hey, I want you to partner with one of my customers, and they don't communicate with me effectively, then it's a non-starter.
Yeah. No, I think that's fair. I mean, I guess this is tangential to low-hanging fruit, right? And like sometimes people will be trying to get my business or working with me and they'll say like, "Oh, like what's your company like I like for instance, I asked someone, "Hey, send over a proposal. Like that sounds like a great thing. I want to run with that. Send me a proposal and we can talk about it." And then they reach out and say, "Oh, like what's your company name that you want to be on this?" And it's like you have my LinkedIn, you have my email, you like can go to my website. Like you know that's low-hanging fruit. Like do a little bit of scratching under the surface first and find that company name. You don't need to ask me that. Send over the contract, and if there's a problem, then I'll revise it,
Well,
right?
I will challenge this slightly because a lot of companies work as a DBA, and sometimes you want to have the the legal
DBA?
doing business as.
Okay.
So sometimes you want to have the legal name of the entity that you're doing business with, so that you could put that on invoices. So you're not just sending it to, you know, Toys R Us or I don't know. That's a horrible example, but like, you know what I mean. But what you did made me think of, which is pretty much the exact same thing you said, just slightly different. Every single interview I give, the best question I ask, and this is the most basic, fundamental, low-hanging fruit question is, what did you think of my website?
Hmm.
80% of candidates never looked at the website. I say, what, and especially if it's like a design or development or social media job, hey, what did you think of my website or social media? What are some what are some ideas you have? And if they didn't look at it, they're not going to have ideas. And if they're
Yeah.
not going to have ideas and they didn't look at your website, what are they doing there? You know what I mean? If you
No,
don't,
yeah, I mean, I completely get that. And I think I try to set aside at least 15 minutes. I think 15 minutes is probably the minimum. Uh, to produce quality backgrounds before I go into a prospect call. You know, I set up a lot of calls based off of LinkedIn interactions and different types of things that I have people coming in. And I check out their LinkedIn. I see where they went to school. I see what their work history was, like what kind of job titles, what kind of companies, read their about section, follow the link to their, if they have a personal website, follow that link, see what that's all about. If it's a company that they're working for or that they own, I go check out that website, go to the about section and the homepage, the services, just try to do a little bit of like what is this person about? Who are they? And how can I relate to them? Like it's not just about like putting my best foot forward, but I mean, this goes back to the beginning of the conversation, right? Is I want to do business with people. And if I can relate to this person on a more personal basis, like, oh, my aunt lives in that town that you live in or that you went to school in. Or like, man, I've got a brother who also graduated from USC, right? Like it's something that you can connect with. And I don't think it's bullshit. I think it's genuinely one, it shows that you did a little bit of homework, and then two, it gets people more comfortable, more relaxed when you can talk about things that are a little more personal in that business context.
purely transactional relationships, especially in service-based businesses, are absolutely doomed to fail, at least on a longer event horizon.
I don't even know. Yeah, I don't think
If you don't make a personal connection or don't have a vested interest in the relationship, it is doomed to fail. Because the thing is, if it's purely transactional, then you are breaking the relationship down into bullet points, right? Into a table, a comparative table. And people could say, hey, this person has this for X dollars and this person has that for Y dollars. We're
yeah.
gonna go with this. If it's purely a a listed service, whatever I'm
It's
trying to say.
commoditized. It's
Yeah.
just a commodity.
But if you build a relationship, then you're not going to be as beholden to like, hey, uh, this deal is better over here because you know, relationships and business aren't just about what's on paper. It's about who you're dealing with, how they're communicating. And I mean, I think that's absolutely huge.
Yeah, I do too. And it's tough. It's been really hard for me because I see it as a double-edged sword, right? It's on one level, I want to make a personal relationship and connection with the people that I work with. On another level, how much time do you invest doing that with each person that you talk to and do like some people are really good at the workflows of setting up regular reminders to reach out and just maintain contact with people in their professional network and prospects over a long period of time. But there's like a part of it to me that feels weird, right? It's like this person is a prospective client. Like I like them. I genuinely like talking to them, but I never would have talked to them ever if I wasn't trying to get business with them. And so it kind of feels weird to me, like although I don't want it to be transactional and although I've developed a relationship with this person, it's there's still this weirdness around especially new relationships where it's like, hey, like I want to get to know you as a person, but at the same time, like I need to be conscious about the amount of time that I'm spending with you because I don't have infinite time. And if this doesn't lead to business, like I have friends, you know?
Yeah,
Like,
but I think the biggest issue with that is you mentioned transactional, and it's if you're looking at a again, if you're looking at a relationship as purely transactional, you will lose in the long run. If you look at it as I can provide amazing value for this person instead of I can get money from this person, then there's no wasted time in terms of those interactions. Because you're
mm,
building a network, you want to provide them with value. If they can't capitalize on that value now, you can have a longer buyer cycle, right? They can capitalize it down the road. Um, I think a lot of my business success I've equated to luck, but it's not really luck. It's just I treat people well and I want people to do well and I try and help them when I can. And so even the people that I can't help right now or aren't a good fit as a client, oftentimes they will refer me to other businesses and be like, "Hey, I talked to this guy. He wasn't a good fit for me because of my needs or my budget or whatever it might be, but you should check him out." You know? And so when you're helping people, I think that really pays dividends in and of itself. And it's a big thing that I've struggled with, and honestly, a big reason why low hanging fruit is the topic of today's conversation, because I started my business with targeting my local market is beneath me. That was my thought, and it's not a great thought because I can do more. Right? Fort
yeah.
Collins is very small. Fort Collins, yes, of course, we have e-commerce companies and service-based companies that I can help, but in my mind, I'm like, I can help large growing companies with my skill set. And focusing on a local market makes me seem small and makes my skill set seem not as good, right? Because usually if you're making more money and you have a great skill set, you're going to be in a bigger city, you're going to be working with bigger clients. And so that was my mentality and frankly it was wrong.
Yeah.
You need to target low-hanging fruit first while simultaneously developing those bigger moves, those bigger plays. And I would say that the ratio probably needs to be 80-20. 80% of your time when you first start out in a business or just business in general is always go after the low hanging fruit because it's low hanging, it's easier. You could build a reputation. There's a lot of benefits we can talk about. And then that 20% of your time, yes, obviously invest in building your brand vision, shooting for the stars, going after the bigger things. But if you're not willing to network in your local market, help local businesses, then I think you're missing a huge opportunity for personal and professional development.
I think that's I think that's right. Um, I think there's a lot of nuance to add here. It really depends on what kind of business you're running and your business and growth plan. Because I think if you know, like we both run service businesses at the end of the day, right? You're in digital marketing and I'm in technology and business consulting. A lot of overlap, but at the same time, we are working directly with businesses to help them with core functions that they need in order to actually deliver their goods or services efficiently. But some businesses, like in technology, right? The low-hanging fruit while it can be beneficial and certainly the lean stuff is, get an MVP out there, get it in the hands of users, just get them running with it. And I guess you can kind of see that as like low-hanging fruit, get it into the people who are willing to use it and get that testing. And that's great. But if you're targeting a market like Uber, it comes to mind, right? Like the low-hanging fruit, they had such their strategy was such a long-term strategy. They weren't trying, and they were investor backed, and so cash flow and profitability wasn't as important to them. So they could stand to keep their eye on a much bigger ball and move towards that rather than spending their time trying to pick up that low-hanging fruit, right? And so it really depends on the business model that you're working in
Oh, but
on
their
what
low-hanging fruit is they
you spend
went
your
after
time.
big cities. They went after big cities where people hated taking taxi cabs. That's low-hanging fruit. They weren't just like, hey, let's deploy Uber to every state and cover as much area as possible because we want to have high saturation and high brand visibility. No, it was let's go to the most congested areas first, the biggest cities first. A lot of these cities were like, hey, you cannot operate here. They operated there anyway,
Well,
right?
that's the thing, right? Is that there were laws in place that made those things not low-hanging fruit. Low-hanging fruit to me would be, hey, let's go do the thing that's easy. We can get some market share. We can test this out. Like we won't have this big battle. But they came in guns blazing, legal team of whaling, ops running. They shot for the moon and they went big and they went hard and they took over an insane amount of market share and now they're just like they've dominated, right? And it's because they said, hey, we're gonna go after these big targets, not these small towns that don't have regulations against us.
When you don't have an ethical or moral compass, low-hanging fruit is everywhere. And that's kind of my point with Uber is it was low-hanging fruit because they decided, hey, we don't care about the law or ethical ramifications behind this business strategy. I mean, it's the same as like, hey, I'm hungry today. What's the best way for me to get a meal? Yeah, I can go rob a little kid and steal their lunchbox. Like that is
Oh, those are
low-hanging
different.
fruit, but you have ethical distinguishing between how you're going to go about finding the best low-hanging fruit.
This is interesting, the difference between ethics and the law. Because when you like, I agree with Uber's approach here. And just because it was illegal doesn't mean it was unethical. Like protection laws that protect industries and embed them and create like monopolistic actors are, in my opinion, unethical. Just because you had some crony politician that passed it through the legislature or your city council and now it's law doesn't mean that it's something that's good, you know? And so in some instances, in my opinion, breaking the law is the ethical thing to do. And now like Uber is so ubiquitous and it's so valuable to people because they don't have to deal with like BS gross taxi cabs. Like sure, sometimes you get into Ubers like the one we got into after the balloon fiesta when we were going over to like it was like, are we going to get killed by this meth head driver, right? Do you remember that one with Jose? That was crazy. But most of the time, like by and large, like 98, 99% of the time when I get into an Uber, it smells good. It's pretty clean. The driver's like pretty cool. Like they have phone chargers. Sometimes they still have water. It's pretty nice. Like the experience is a lot better. And in my opinion, that's like that's better for people. Like poor taxi cab driver, like that's a bummer for the taxi cab driver and for the owners who like entrench their business that way. But like, what does the law have any business entrenching an industry like that? Like, it doesn't make sense to me.
There's a whole lot that we could go into here. I'm not gonna, and I don't really want to.
That's fair. But low hanging fruit. So back to the topic. Like, what was your concept? What was your idea when you proposed it at first?
Local market saturation networking. It's something I'm starting to pick up more on and focus on, and I think it's a no-brainer. Everyone says pick a niche. I didn't want to. It was a personal decision because again, I like to do a variety of things and picking one thing and hammering that out for a while, I think could would have driven me crazy. But the flip side is if you pick it and go big enough at it, then it opens up your possibilities to expand your team, to have increased cash flow, and to really do the things that you're passionate about. And it's kind of like um, how people talk about becoming an entrepreneur. I think for some people it makes sense to, quit your job and just go for it and like just put all of your time, energy, and effort into it. And then for
Yeah.
other people, I think it's, hey, absolutely keep your job and on the side start building things up. And gradually over time, your 9 to 5, you're still gonna have that paycheck. You're gonna build up your savings. You'll build your entrepreneurial business on the side once it's ready to really take off and replace your 9 to 5 revenue stream, income, then you quit that job. But it depends on who you are. Like I quit my job and I just went all in on this, and I didn't make money for 4 months, which means that I dipped into my savings for 4 months. Whereas if I would have kept my job and just built this on the side, like I know a lot of other marketers have done, then I could have made a bunch of money
Yeah.
early on, but then not had that like intense drive at the beginning of the foundation.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting observation. And I think on the topic of ethics, I think it's far more ethical to quit your job and lean into your own business because if like it's really difficult to focus on two things, really difficult. Unless those things are inherently part-time, right? But when you have a 9 to 5 and you're trying to get a business going, like either your business is going to be part-time or you're not going to be completely focused on your 9 to 5. And then you're asking an employer to subsidize your activities and your work product is going to suffer. And that just,
I don't think that's necessarily
right?
the case. There's a lot of hours in the week.
Sure. I mean, in some people who are really good at it, like if they are willing to grind it out like that, like they can do it. I don't think like especially when you get into like we're both in our 30s now, like I have a family, and so as much as like we've been getting a side project going, I have the great thing about my practice right now is I have a couple of clients that are, I devote a certain number of hours to, and it's deliverable based, and so I can do that work and spend time on other aspects of my life because I don't have a 9 to 5, and so it doesn't detract from the amount that I'm able to give to them because the amount that I need to give to them is part time, right? But even still, like after the kids go to bed, me and my wife we've been getting to work lately because we're trying to get this project. We have projects that we're trying to get done, and it's exhausting. So if you have a 9 to 5 and you have a family, like, and you're trying to get a business going, that one, it's unsustainable. Two, I think it's untenable. I don't think you can give your all to all of those endeavors the way that they all deserve. Um, but I mean, back to the low-hanging fruit, I think you're right. I think when it comes down to it, we are witnessing a shift in markets that I think is pretty profound. And I think a lot of people are capitalizing on it, and I think it will continue. And it is the move away from like big corporate brands and big business and these consolidated things. Like I think there's a shift towards local providers that is very real and happening so that you can get a more personal experience. This person, you know them, you like are related to them somehow, or you're somehow friends with them, or they're in your extended network, and it's a community driven thing, right? And I don't know. I guess I'm kind of rambling here. There's a lot of threads driving in my mind. I guess my point is, as far as low-hanging fruit goes, especially as boomers start to retire and their businesses are sold, I think a lot of people are leaving their 9 to 5s at big corporations, and they're taking on these smaller, more localized, more community oriented, not necessarily hobby businesses, but like lifestyle businesses, right? Where you don't have to make uh, a ton of money and move up a ladder. You can make a reasonable amount and live pretty happily and work 9 to 5 and run a business. And it's community oriented. And it's beneficial. It's not just usurious. It's not like sucking value out of people and just divvying it out to nameless, faceless shareholders who are just interested in collecting power and wealth, and they don't care about the poison and the terrible engineering designs that just drive up the price of costs and goods and services in order to enrich themselves. Sorry, that's my end of my diatribe.
That was super intense.
Dude, I'm telling you, like I listened to this segment on the McDonald's frost ice cream machines. Do you know anything about McDonald's ice cream machines?
A lot about McDonald's ice cream machines.
You do? You've gone down this rabbit hole?
No, I used to have a client that was they're one of the franchisees, Taylor, right? Um,
Yeah.
yeah. So I had a Taylor franchisee. I mean, this was years ago, and I talked. I mean, he's a really great guy. They had a monopoly on all McDonald's supply for machines and all maintenance for machines. So McDonald's workers not allowed to legally maintain their machines because they're basically taking jobs away from Taylor. Um, that's why they're all, broken so often. So McDonald's, I think, reverse engineered and decided to make their own machine. Is that the most recent news?
Well, some guy, some entrepreneurial guy. So they're like, I think there are a few different data points here. There's one, it's not just that the Taylor had an exclusive service contract, it's that like someone was observing that some significant portion of machines were down all over the country all the time. And then someone else was like, that's interesting. Let's look into that and see why. And they dug into the code and they found in the code of these Taylor machines like built-in mechanisms to bring the machines offline on some certain regular cadence in order to drive a
It
huge
contained.
amount of service revenue for Taylor. And so there's like these different companies that control and own these service and franchising and anyway,
Like
it
it was like
seemed like
iPhone's
big
planned
money.
obsolescence of battery consumption. It was, hey, the battery can 100% be fine with this, computational power, even with a new OS, but they intentionally made it so that it crapped out. So you have to buy a new phone.
Yeah, similar to that, except it's yeah, and then they make it so you can't replace the battery, or like in Taylor's instance, they make it so nobody can service the machines, but someone figured it out and made this little code breaker device that you could plug in, and now you can figure out what was wrong with the machine and fix it yourself instead of spending a bunch of money on Taylor. And so then they sued that guy, or they tried to reverse engineer. Anyway, it's an example of an industry building purposefully faulty and poorly engineered devices in order to drive service revenue. And so, like this weekend, I replaced the floor underneath our like we have an RV that we've been living out of for the last year on our cross country travels, and the sofa slide, it's like a 9 foot slide. Um, I had to replace the floor. Well, the way they engineered this is just they make it basically impossible for an individual to replace that floor without destroying different components or spending just like an inane amount of time replacing and bringing everything down in order to put everything up. And it's like most people don't go about replacing their own floor, and so they don't run into that problem. They just take it into the dealership, and the dealer makes a ton of money because their service techs have to spend an insane amount of time to unravel this poorly engineered thing that was engineered to rot the floor. Like they designed this to allow water to get into that floor. Like no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And then they make money on here, 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 and here, right? And it's not right. Um, so don't do that to your customers. Don't build bullshit products and then just rake them over the coals on servicing and fixing the problems that you create for them.
You know what's a
Bogus.
tough one for me is website development. Um, there's a couple platforms that make sense for website development, and platforms like Wix, Squarespace, they're nice because they're less likely to break, because the updates are rolled out and you're not really bringing in a lot of third-party code,
Yeah.
right? The platforms themselves are buggy. They're not great platforms. They've made a lot of strides in the last couple of years for sure. But because it's like all in, it's kind of like Apple's ecosystem where everything has to get approved. It's less likely that an iPhone's going to break. Whereas Android, because it's more open source, there's more opportunities for things to break it, right? So with websites, the thing is with WordPress, you're taking in it's incredible because you can pull in these open source plugins from so many different vendors to solve so many different use cases, which makes it incredibly flexible. But then you have this maintenance costs on it, and your website is more likely to break than something like Webflow, which is a much more all-inclusive platform. But the monthly cost of Webflow is 10x what it is for WordPress. So that what I'm getting at is I build these sites because I believe in these sites and I want to build awesome things for my customers, but it does require some level of maintenance over time. And so, do you build that in the initial cost? Do you build that as a quarterly maintenance fee or annual fee? Um, what a lot of agencies do is they internalize the website. So basically, they own the website, customers don't have access, and they use the everything I just said as justification for that. When in reality, they're doing that so that if a client leaves them, they can grab them by the balls and not let them go and say, "Hey, if you leave, we're keeping your site. You're losing all of this value. You're losing your domain name. You're losing all of these things." And so it's just wild that like something that is somewhat outside of our control. Like if I want to build you a WordPress site, it does need to be maintained. Otherwise, there's security vulnerabilities, all these things. That's a real justification for maintenance work that is relatively outside of my control unless we choose a completely different platform, which I still don't really recommend at this point. Webflow, great, whatever. But then using that as a justification to do unethical business practices, that's what's so wild to me is that it's so easy for companies to do that, especially for people who don't know better, right?
Well, and that's the thing. Yeah, that was what was floating around in the back of my head as you were saying that is for people who don't, if someone knows better and reads that contract and is willing to say, hey, no, this like I'm paying you to build this site. It is my site. Like, I'm not going to allow you to retain control over that. And if you want to retain control over that, I'm going to pay you less, or I'm going to go find someone else. And so this is where like contracting, you have to have a savvy party on both sides in order to avoid that. Because, if you sign that contract, like it's outlined in a contract, it's got to be outlined in a contract. Um, then that sucks. You got egg on your face, and is it ethical or unethical? I don't know. If you sign the contract, it's what you signed up for.
Well, I think
It's
I think it's unethical to bury things in your contract that you know are a gotcha clause. I think it's
Yeah, but it's
incredibly
not
unethical.
like varying. It's like if you're paying someone to do something for you, then the one of the critical clauses is who retains ownership of that work product. Like that's not a burying thing. That's like one of the primary operative clauses of that contract. And if you're not paying attention to that one, then that's on you to a certain degree. Like you have to leverage your experts. You have
Owning
to.
someone's IP is very different from owning someone's work product. It's in very, very different things. Someone
Mm,
grabs you by the balls, hey, I built Peace, Love, Freedom, I built this website, and they take over your website and say, if you move on, your website, peacelovefreedom.com, you don't get to keep that. We have control over your domain. All of the website content that you paid for, you don't actually own. That's insane. I
yeah, it
think
is insane, but it's insane for someone to sign that contract. Like, don't do that or pay less. And so if you're paying a cheaper price and that's a balance that you're deciding on, then great. I mean, that sucks if you decide to move on, but that's a risk you took. But nah, I don't. I mean, don't get me wrong, reading contracts isn't always easy, but I don't think.
point is that you shouldn't have to bring in an expensive salesperson to not get taken advantage of. Same with Taylor. You should not assume that the company you're working with, even if there's a clause in their contract that we have to service, that they're intentionally going to break machines so that they service them. I've been reading this book, To Sell Is Human by Daniel Pink, and one of the biggest distinctions between what he's saying is happening now within the last 5 to 10 years versus previously is caveat emptor versus caveat venditor. So buyer beware versus seller beware. And it used to previously be buyer beware because the informational balance was almost always in the hands of salespeople. Meaning,
Yeah.
you go to a car dealership, they knew all of the stats around a car. They knew how much the car cost, they know the negotiating room, and buyers really didn't have access to a lot of that information. And now with the advent of the internet and with uh, reputations being so prolific online, now it's switching to seller beware because if you keep fucking people over, it's you're not going to last in business anymore. You can't keep getting away with it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, 100% read contracts and try and figure out if people are trying to fuck you over. But at the same time, like when people do fuck you over, scream it from the rooftops because you should not go into a contract assuming that someone is intentionally trying to do something that is not in your best interest.
You should do that. Yeah, you should. You should read every contract with high scrutiny to understand whether or not the terms are balanced across both parties. And like if you're receiving a contract from somebody else, you should assume that that contract is written to benefit them more than it is to benefit you. Like that's you should do that, and contracts should be negotiated. I think you're absolutely right in the seller beware versus buyer beware dynamic, and that's why I think licensure is morally and ethically abhorrent and outdated, right? Maybe once upon a time when snake oil salesman actually was a snake oil salesman, and you couldn't know better. Like, yeah, sure, let's have some guidelines so that person could be punished for operating outside of a license. But now it's like, what does the government have to be involved in my ability to provide goods and services to this person when we have these transparency mechanisms to provide customers and buyers that info to bridge that informational gap that you were talking about, right? And so with that in mind, like, yeah, like I think this the technology in these contracts and these things that you sign, right? Like terms of use. Like we've been conditioned to just assume, oh, I can't negotiate that. I'll just click through it or I'll just sign it, you know? And that's true to a certain degree when you're dealing with the nameless, faceless app developer. Like you're not going to be able to negotiate the Facebook contract and still use Facebook unless you're like the US government and you're going to pay them a bunch of money, right? Like then maybe Facebook will negotiate with you. But for service contracts and vendor contracts and business relationship contracts, you absolutely can negotiate those contracts. Or and even like as a homeowner, if someone's going to come and replace the floors in my house, like read that contract. You don't need to just sign that if you want your floor replaced. Like you have to go into it assuming those terms benefit them more than they benefit you, and you need to be willing to push on them to negotiate better terms for yourself or a
Benefit
better
more
price.
versus benefit less is very different from intentionally putting clauses into your contract where you can screw people over. That's my point. There is the concept of a social contract where in a civilized society, people are not intentionally entering in agreements where they know they're taking advantage of the other party and creating long-term harm. I think that's incredibly important. So, yes, you can have someone screw you over and you could be like, hey, everyone, this guy screwed me over. Like, this is really not cool. And they could be like, well, it's in our contract that, it's totally allowed for us to do this. Well, it's like, yeah, I could write anything legally into my contract as long as it's not violating state and federal laws. Yeah, I could do things in there. But again, it goes back to is it ethically or morally responsible to put things in there when you know it's not just a cover your ass scenario, it's a hey, I am intentionally taking advantage of people scenario. I don't think that's right.
Yeah, I mean, there's this in contracts. There's this. I'm trying to remember the case because it's like it came up all the time in contracts and it was like really funny. It was like what the professor would be like, and there's this, and you would cite the case, but there's this implied covenant of good faith and fair dealing in contracts, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Good faith is, yeah.
And so that, I mean, that is certainly true, but I don't know. I tend to be because what you're describing is it's like, okay, so we think that the world should be this way, and that's great. Like I agree with you. I would prefer that people don't include things in the contracts that are just going to screw me over, that I have to spend 3 days reading it in order to really understand whether or not I'm getting screwed over to in this agreement for website services. Like that's crazy. But on the other hand, like what is the solution, right? Like, okay, we want the government to create laws and regulations against
No, the
that, or
solution is you tarnish someone's reputation to the point where they can no longer operate their business.
exactly, it's a market
I mean,
force. So,
in severe circumstances like 2008, obviously there does need to be some bigger intervention, right?
oh, like why are these industries that were
Yeah,
deliberately
industries are
screwing over
totally.
the American people got bailed out by the government and taxpayers, and there was no accountability whatsoever, and those
Yeah,
people are still millionaires walking around on the street, balling out of control in their yachts.
yeah, that's insane. It's
Yeah,
insane. People got to
it's
take advantage of people, and they were within their legal right to some extent to do that because they were operating in a gray area, right?
it's not just that there was in their legal right, it's that they were paid by the government to do that.
Yeah.
Like, what? Like, what? No, dude, you had shady business practices and you fucked up and you need to pay the consequences.
I mean, this is something I see with a lot of like bigger companies. They keep doing this, and I have a one strike policy for when people try to take advantage of me. One strike, you're done. It's not, oh, you get a second chance. It's one strike. You either fix it right now or you're done. And
Yeah.
I'm not going to name names on this, but I switched from a major company recently because what they were doing was you have this signed agreement, right? Hey, I'm going to pay you, let's say it's $500 a month. Pay them $500 a month and they go, okay, here's our taxes, here's our service charge, here's our maintenance fee, here's our fucking in the ass fee, right? It's like I didn't sign up. I didn't sign up for 200 additional dollars. And like, well, that's just how it is. It's like, no, that's not how it is. I signed up to pay 500. Obviously, charge me tax if you need to, but you don't just get to add on all these additional fees outside of the agreement that was signed. Nor should you be allowed to change those fees whenever you feel like it. And a lot of businesses do that. And it's crazy. It's like, why did this fee go up? Well, our cost went up. Well, that's not what I signed up for. I signed up to pay you an amount, and now you're charging me 3x that amount because you think it's appropriate to take advantage. Just charge people, put the price of what things are as what they are. I don't get that.
Yeah.
I don't get that.
No, I get that. And the thing is, what you did is absolutely right. Like you moved, vote with your feet, right? And that's
I
what
mean,
capitalism is.
anyway,
That's what the free market is. It's like, oh, this person is doing business in a way that is not to my benefit and I don't like it. I have the ability to go and do business with a competitor who is more aligned with my values, better in my price, gives a better service, yada yada yada, right? The thing that's interesting is capitalism has come under a bad rap these days because of practices like you're talking about. And what a lot of people who just like to hate on capitalism, there's like this bizarre, like there's this bizarre incongruity in the logic is, oh, these big corporations are extracting value from the general population. Um, And so we need the government to correct that. But the problem is not that the corporations are doing anything bad, like in and of their like free market. It's that they've captured the government and they're controlling the government.
yeah,
And
they're
so if you
stolen
just
or
add
they're
the
yeah,
government as a
subsidizing.
layer, you're
Yeah,
not going to solve the problem. You're going to make it worse, right? It's like capitalism and free markets aren't necessarily bad. It's when capitalism and free markets capture the government, and so it's no longer a free market. It's a market slanted in favor of the corporations that already have control and market share. That's a problem because those are no longer free markets.
yeah.
So it's like, how do you dismantle that regulatory framework where it's like we have this idea in our heads like, oh, regulations protect and help people. They're good. It's like, no, they don't. Most regulations were put there by companies who are able to fund politicians to pass favorable regulations to entrench and protect their business interests, right? Like they're not there to, like some regulations were there to protect people. Like the Clean Air, Clean Water Act, I think has pretty good elements to it. Like if you think about pictures back in the 70s of like smog and just disgusting rivers and things like that all over the country, like that sucks. That's awful. And sure, some of those things are important. Um, but a lot of these a lot of things that are under the guise of like consumer protection and regulations to control like businesses are just to keep small businesses down and big businesses up. And
I don't have enough research or data to back uh, my opinion on this one way or another, but I mean, I think there are definitely things where if a company's big enough and a company's trying to grow, it will intentionally operate in ethical gray areas so that it could get ahead. And I think that is proven time and time and time again. And because they are gray areas and it's not super black and white, the response of consumers can have a massive amount of lag time. I think the whole like carbon emissions or don't use plastic bags or some of these other things that are happening is often put on the shoulders of the consumer when realistically if companies were ethical it would be on their shoulders instead.
I don't know. I don't agree with
I mean,
that.
if you're dumping all of your waste, your toxic waste into a river because that's an easy way to dispose of things and it's unlikely that you're going to get caught, or it's unlikely that you're going to get caught for 15, 20, 30 years before it's too late by the consumers voting with their feet, then yeah, I mean, I think that's there are times where there needs to be oversight of some extent. I don't know if that's necessarily government,
Oh yeah, I agree with you.
but I just think that's yeah. Anyways, we gotta wrap it up here, folks. We didn't really jump that much into the whole low-hanging fruit. We kind of just went into government overreach.
No, we didn't. We just landed there at the end. Really, what it comes down
Ethical
to is
business
balance.
practices and how to talk with your feet. So maybe
I don't
next
know. I
episode.
think it all comes like it circles back to balance, right? It's like low hanging fruit. How much time do you invest in that? You got to find a balance. For you, it sounds like it's 80-20. For other people, it might be something else. Uh, so cool. All right, this is fun, dude. I love this. I'll talk to you soon.
Okay.
Love you, bro. Peace.